The Galactic Academy of Sciences stood as a monument to peaceful cooperation among the stars. Its crystalline spires reached toward the heavens, housing the brightest minds from across known space. Within its halls, young beings from dozens of species learned together, sharing knowledge that had taken millennia to accumulate. Professor Zelkine adjusted his breathing apparatus as he prepared for another day of teaching advanced xenobiology. The Cytherian educator had spent decades studying the various species that made up the Galactic Council, but one student continued to puzzle him. Sarah Chen sat in the third row, her Deathworld origins making her an oddity among her peers. The classroom filled with the usual mix of species. Delicate Etherians floated in their protective bubbles, their gossamer wings catching the artificial sunlight. The reptilian Vorthak students kept their body temperatures regulated through specialized suits, while the insectoid Zephyrite clicked their mandibles in what passed for casual conversation among their kind. Sarah appeared unremarkable by human standards. Average height, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the standard academy uniform. But every other species in the room knew what she represented. Earth was classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, a planet so hostile that most galactic citizens required extensive life support just to visit its surface. Today we will examine the defensive mechanisms of various species, Professor Zelkane announced, his translated voice carrying through the room's universal communication system. Understanding how different beings protect themselves is crucial for any xenobiologist working in the field. The professor activated the holographic display, showing a three-dimensional model of a crystalline beetle from Proxima 7. The Vorthak evolved their armored scales after centuries of facing these predators. Notice how the overlapping plates provide maximum protection while maintaining mobility. Keth Tar, a young Vorthak student, puffed out his chest with pride. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their defensive capabilities. Their home world, while not as extreme as a death world, presented enough challenges to forge them into natural warriors. Now, the professor continued, let us examine more recent evolutionary adaptations. The display shifted to show various tools and weapons used by different species. The Etherians developed energy manipulation to compensate for their physical fragility, while the Zephyrite rely on their natural chitinous armor and coordinated swarm tactics. Sarah listened with polite attention, taking notes like any other student. She had learned early in her time at the academy that drawing attention to her origins only led to uncomfortable questions and fearful stares. For our practical demonstration today, Professor Zelkane announced, I want each species to show their natural defensive techniques. This will help you understand the biological imperatives that drive survival instincts. One by one, students demonstrated their abilities. The Etherians created shimmering energy shields, their forms becoming even more translucent as they channeled their power. The Vorthak student named Kethtar showed how his scales could deflect energy blasts, while the Zephyrite formed a defensive formation that would make even experienced military units take notice. As the demonstrations continued, Sarah noticed the subtle glances in her direction. Everyone knew that humans were different, but few understood exactly how or why. The galactic databases contained limited information about Earth's inhabitants, mostly focusing on their unusual resilience and adaptability. Miss Chen, Professor Zelkane called, his four eyes focusing on her with obvious curiosity. Perhaps you could share humanity's defensive techniques? The room fell silent. Sarah stood slowly, aware that every being present was watching her intently. The weight of representing her entire species pressed down on her shoulders. But she had faced this situation before. Humans don't have natural armor or energy manipulation abilities, she began, her voice steady despite the attention. Our home world taught us different lessons. She moved to the center of the room, and Professor Zelkine dimmed the lights slightly to better accommodate the various visual spectrums of his students. Sarah reached into her kit bag, a standard piece of equipment that every student carried for practical demonstrations. Our ancestors faced predators that could crush us with ease, environments that could kill us in minutes, and countless other threats, Sarah continued as she searched through her bag. But we learned something that many species never had to discover. Her hand found what she was looking for, and she withdrew a simple metal object. To most of the class, it appeared to be nothing more than a basic cutting tool, perhaps used for food preparation or simple tasks. We learned that the greatest defense is often a good offense, Sarah said, and with a practiced flick of her wrist, the object in her hand transformed. The knife snapped open with a sharp click that seemed to echo through the suddenly tense classroom. The blade, while small by human standards, gleamed with a cold efficiency that made several students instinctively back away. Sarah held it with casual confidence, her grip showing years of familiarity with such tools. On Earth, we call this a switchblade, she explained, seemingly unaware of the collective intake of breath from her classmates. It's designed for quick deployment in emergency situations. Professor Zelkane's breathing apparatus hissed as his respiration rate increased. In all his years of teaching, no student had ever brought what was clearly a weapon into his classroom. The Academy's sensors should have detected it, but human technology often confused their scanning systems. "Miss Chen," the professor said carefully, his voice betraying his nervousness, "Academy regulations clearly state that weapons are not permitted in educational settings." Sarah looked genuinely confused for a moment before understanding dawned on her face. "Oh, this isn't a weapon, Professor, it's a tool. Every human carries something like this. We use them for everything from opening packages to cutting food to emergency first aid." The distinction seemed meaningless to most of the class. Keth Tar, the Vorthak student, had unconsciously activated his defensive scales, their metallic surface now gleaming with readiness. The Etherians had drifted higher in the room, their energy fields flickering with anxiety. "Perhaps," Professor Zelkane suggested with forced calm, "you could demonstrate its defensive applications without any sudden movements?" Sarah nodded, understanding finally dawning that her casual display of the blade had alarmed her classmates. She had grown so accustomed to the peaceful nature of the Academy that she had forgotten how other species viewed such tools. "The principle is simple," she began, holding the knife steady. "Humans learned that size and natural armor mean nothing if you can strike at vulnerable points with precision and speed." She moved with deliberate slowness, demonstrating basic defensive positions and explaining the biomechanics behind human combat techniques. But even her careful educational movements carried a fluid grace that spoke of countless hours of practice. "Our reflexes were honed by creatures much faster than us," Sarah continued. "Our strength was developed by constantly fighting gravity that would crush most of you. Our precision came from needing to hit small, fast targets with limited tools." As she spoke, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. The other students were beginning to understand that they weren't looking at a young being playing with a dangerous toy. They were watching a predator demonstrate techniques passed down through millions of years of evolutionary pressure. "The blade becomes an extension of the hand," Sarah explained, her voice taking on an almost meditative quality. "On Earth, the difference between predator and prey often came down to who could use their tools more effectively." She closed the knife with another sharp click and returned it to her bag. But the damage was done. Every being in the room now understood what it meant to come from a Deathworld, and more importantly, what it meant to survive there. Professor Zelkine cleared his throat nervously. "Thank you, Miss Chen. That was quite illuminating. Perhaps we should move on to our next topic." But Sarah raised her hand, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Actually, Professor, I think we've only scratched the surface of human defensive techniques. Would you like me to show the class what we do when we don't have tools?" The silence that followed her question was deafening. In that moment, every student in the room realized that the quiet human girl they had been studying alongside for months was something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And Sarah Chen, daughter of Earth, student of the stars, was just getting started. The question hung in the air like a challenge waiting to be answered. Professor Zelkane found himself in uncharted territory, his academic mind warring with his survival instincts. Around the classroom, students shifted nervously in their seats, breathing apparatus hissing, energy fields flickering, and chitinous plates rustling with tension. Sarah Chen stood calmly in the center of it all, her human physiology betraying none of the stress responses her classmates were displaying. Her heart rate remained steady, her breathing controlled, her posture relaxed but ready. These were adaptations that her species had developed over millions of years of facing threats that would have destroyed most other civilizations before they ever reached the stars. "Miss Chen," Professor Zelkane said slowly, "I believe we have covered sufficient ground for today's lesson." But the damage was already done. The other students were staring at Sarah with a mixture of fear and fascination that she recognized all too well. It was the same look she had received when she first arrived at the academy, before she had learned to downplay her origins and blend in with the peaceful academic environment. Lisa Thrin, one of the Etherian students, drifted closer to the floor, her gossamer wings creating patterns of light as she moved. "You said you would show us what humans do without tools," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her species. "I find myself curious about this, despite my better judgment." Sarah glanced around the room, noting the way each species had unconsciously prepared for danger. The Vorthak students had positioned themselves near the exits, their natural warrior instincts overriding their academic curiosity. The Zephyrite had formed a loose defensive cluster, their compound eyes tracking every micro-movement Sarah made. "Understanding is the foundation of peace," Sarah said, echoing one of the Academy's core principles. "If you want to truly comprehend what it means to come from a death world, then yes, I can show you." Professor Zelkine activated his personal comm unit, likely alerting Academy security to the unusual situation developing in his classroom. Sarah noticed, but made no comment. She understood his caution, even if it stung to be treated as a potential threat. "The first thing you need to understand," Sarah began, moving to an open area of the classroom, "is that humans evolved as persistence hunters. Most of our prey was faster than us, stronger than us, had better natural weapons, or could fly." She gestured to her own body with clinical detachment. "So we developed other advantages. Watch my stance." Sarah settled into a basic ready position, her feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, hands loose at her sides. To the untrained observer, it might have looked casual, but every student in the room could sense the coiled potential in her posture. "Humans can maintain physical activity for hours without rest," she explained. "Our sweat-based cooling system, our efficient cardiovascular systems, our ability to metabolize both plant and animal proteins, all of these work together to make us nearly impossible to escape from once we begin pursuit." Keth Tar, the Vorthak student, made a dismissive gesture with his clawed hand. "Endurance means nothing against proper armor and weapons. My people have faced larger, more persistent predators than humans." Sarah's smile turned predatory, and several students instinctively moved backward. "Your people evolved on a world with an oxygen content 12% lower than Earth's. Your gravity is roughly 60% of what I grew up with. And your largest predators hunt alone, not in coordinated packs." She began to move, not quickly, but with a flowing efficiency that spoke of countless hours of training. Her movements seemed almost dance-like, but every gesture served a purpose. She demonstrated how humans could use their bipedal stance to generate power, how their opposable thumbs allowed for complex grappling techniques, how their forward-facing eyes provided the depth perception necessary for precise strikes. "This is called shadow boxing," Sarah explained as she moved through a series of combat techniques. "We practice fighting invisible opponents to improve our reflexes and muscle memory." The demonstration was mesmerizing and terrifying in equal measure. Sarah's movements flowed from strikes to grapples to defensive positions with seamless transitions that spoke of a martial tradition stretching back millennia. Every technique was designed to overcome larger, stronger, or more numerous opponents through speed, precision, and tactical thinking. "On Earth," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the physical activity, "we have a saying, it's not the size of the fighter, it's the fight in the fighter. We learn to compensate for our physical limitations through technique, strategy, and sheer determination." Lysithrin had become completely still, her energy field pulsing with what could only be described as fascination mixed with terror. "You mean to say that all humans possess these abilities?" "To varying degrees," Sarah replied, slowing her movements to a stop. "Some specialize in different aspects. Combat sports, martial arts, military training, even basic self-defense courses. On a death world, everyone learns to fight, because the alternative is extinction." Professor Zelkane found his voice, though it carried a tremor that his translation software couldn't quite mask. "Miss Chen, this is quite remarkable from an academic standpoint, but surely you don't mean to suggest that humans are naturally violent." Sarah's expression softened, and for a moment she looked like nothing more than a young student again. "Not violent, Professor. Prepared. There's a difference between seeking conflict and being ready for it when it finds you." She gestured to her classmates. "Every species in this room evolved defenses against the threats on their homeworlds. Armor, energy manipulation, natural weapons, toxic secretions. Humans evolved something different. We became the threat." The implications of her words settled over the classroom like a heavy blanket. These students had grown up in a galaxy where conflicts were resolved through diplomacy, trade negotiations, and careful territorial agreements. The concept of a species that had clawed its way to sapience through constant warfare was both alien and deeply unsettling. "But here's what makes humans truly dangerous," Sarah continued, her voice taking on an almost philosophical tone. "We learned to cooperate despite our aggressive nature. We formed tribes, nations, alliances. We shared our combat techniques instead of hoarding them. We made war into an art form, and then we made peace into a science." She looked around the room, meeting each student's gaze in turn. "Every human child learns basic combat techniques the same way your children learn to manipulate energy or coordinate with their swarms. It's not aggression, it's preparation. Because on Earth, being unprepared means dying." Zikthara, one of the Zephyrite students, clicked her mandibles in a pattern that indicated deep thought. "You speak of combat as if it were as natural as breathing. How does your species function in peaceful environments?" "The same way we function in hostile ones," Sarah replied. "We adapt. The aggression that helped us survive becomes competitiveness in sports and business. The pack-hunting instincts become teamwork in exploration and research. The tactical thinking becomes strategic planning for long-term goals." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "But the skills remain. They have to. Because even though we've left Earth, we haven't left our nature behind. We're still the species that looked at the most hostile planet in known space and decided to call it home." The classroom security alert chimed, indicating that Academy safety personnel were standing by outside. Sarah noticed but continued her explanation, understanding that her words might be the difference between fear and respect among her classmates. "I'm not here to intimidate anyone," she said, her voice carrying genuine sincerity. "I'm here to learn, just like all of you. But part of that learning involves understanding each other's true nature, not just the polite facades we present in peaceful settings." She gestured to the knife still secured in her kit bag. That blade wasn't meant as a threat. To me, it's as natural as your energy fields or your armor plating. It's a tool that my species developed to survive, and we carry it with the same casual acceptance that you carry your natural defenses. Professor Zelkine slowly deactivated his emergency comm, though his 4 eyes remained fixed on Sarah with newfound respect and wariness. Miss Chen, I believe you have given us all much to consider about the nature of interspecies interaction and understanding. But Sarah wasn't finished. She had seen the way her classmates looked at her, and she knew that half-understanding was often more dangerous than ignorance. If they were going to fear her, they needed to understand why that fear might someday be the thing that saved their lives. There's one more thing you need to know about humans, she said, her voice carrying a weight that made every student in the room pay attention. Everything I've shown you, every technique I've demonstrated, every adaptation I've explained, represents only what a single human can accomplish. She paused, letting the implications sink in. We've never fought alone. The final words hung in the air with the weight of a revelation that changed everything. Sarah Chen stood in the center of the classroom, surrounded by beings who were beginning to understand that their quiet human classmate represented something far more significant than they had ever imagined. Professor Zelkine felt his academic curiosity warring with a primitive survival instinct that millions of years of peaceful evolution had nearly bred out of his species. Around the room, students who had moments before been casually interested in a xenobiology demonstration now watched Sarah with the careful attention usually reserved for natural disasters or stellar phenomena. "Pack hunters," whispered Lysithrin, her ethereal form shimmering with nervous energy. "You evolved as pack hunters." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. Humans are never truly alone, even when we appear to be. We carry the tactical knowledge of our entire species with us wherever we go. Every technique I demonstrated, every adaptation I explained, was developed and refined by millions of humans over thousands of generations. She moved to the classroom's central display projector, and with practiced ease, called up a holographic star map. Earth appeared at the center, a blue-green marble that looked deceptively peaceful from space. "This is what most species see when they look at Earth," Sarah said, her voice taking on the cadence of a lecturer. "A beautiful but dangerous world, notable primarily for its hostile environment and the fact that it somehow produced sapient life." With a gesture, she expanded the display to show humanity's expansion into space. The progression was modest compared to older galactic civilizations, but the pattern was unmistakable. Human colonies didn't just survive in their new environments, they thrived. "But this is what you should be seeing," Sarah continued, highlighting the strategic positioning of human settlements. "Every human colony is placed to provide mutual support. Every space station serves multiple defensive and logistical purposes. Every exploration vessel carries not just scientists and diplomats, but the accumulated combat experience of an entire species." Keth Tar, the Vorthak student, had unconsciously activated his full defensive posture, his scaled hide gleaming with metallic readiness. "You speak of your expansion as if it were a military campaign." "Because it is," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Not an aggressive one, but absolutely a military one. Humans don't explore space, we secure it. We don't establish colonies, we create forward operating bases. We don't engage in diplomacy, we conduct strategic negotiations." The implications of her words were staggering. Every interaction that galactic civilizations had experienced with humans took on new meaning when viewed through this lens. Their helpful assistance during the Proximan trade crisis suddenly looked like intelligence gathering. Their generous offers to establish joint research stations appeared to be strategic positioning. Their seemingly peaceful mining operations revealed themselves as resource denial tactics. Miss Chen, Professor Zelkane said carefully, are you suggesting that humanity views the galaxy as a potential battlefield? Sarah's expression softened slightly, and she shook her head. No, Professor. We view the galaxy as a place that contains potential battlefields. There's a crucial difference. She manipulated the display again, showing the locations of various galactic conflicts over the past several centuries. In each case, human settlements or vessels had been positioned to provide aid, support, or evacuation services to affected populations. Humans learned something on Earth that most species never had to discover, Sarah explained. Peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of superior preparation. When everyone knows you're ready for war, war becomes unnecessary. Zikthara, the Zephyrite student, clicked her mandibles in a pattern of deep consideration. You mean to say that human peaceful intentions are backed by military capability? Every human peaceful intention is backed by the absolute certainty that we can defend it, Sarah confirmed. We extend friendship with one hand and keep the other free to draw steel if necessary. It's not distrust, it's responsibility. She gestured to her classmates, her expression earnest. Each of your species developed different survival strategies. You became specialized for your particular environments and threats. But humans became generalists. We learned to fight everything, survive anywhere, and adapt to any situation. The classroom's atmosphere had changed completely. What had begun as a routine xenobiology lesson had become something approaching a strategic briefing. Students who had viewed humans as slightly exotic, but essentially harmless, now understood they had been sitting beside representatives of the galaxy's most formidable military force. This changes how we must view human participation in galactic affairs, Professor Zelkine observed, his academic mind struggling to process the implications. If every human carries this level of combat capability and strategic thinking— It shouldn't change anything, Sarah interrupted gently. Humans want the same things every species wants: peace, prosperity, knowledge, and the chance to raise our children in safety. The difference is that we're prepared to fight for those things if we have to. She closed the holographic display and returned to her seat, but the casual gesture did nothing to diminish the impact of her demonstration. Every being in the room now understood that they were looking at a representative of a species that had turned survival into an art form and warfare into a science. The blade I showed you earlier, Sarah said, settling back into her chair, isn't just a tool for cutting, it's a symbol of readiness. Every human carries something similar, not because we expect trouble, but because we're prepared for it when it finds us. Lysithrin drifted closer, her energy field pulsing with curiosity that had overcome her initial fear. You said humans learn to cooperate despite your aggressive nature. How do you prevent that aggression from destroying your own society? Sarah smiled, and for the first time since her demonstration began, it was entirely human and entirely warm. By directing it outward, toward the real threats. Humans compete with each other constantly, but we unite instantly when faced with external danger. It's what we call the pack bond. We'll fight each other over territory, resources, or philosophical differences, but threaten one human, and you threaten them all. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for every student in the room. Humanity wasn't just individually dangerous, they were collectively unstoppable. Every human carried the combat potential of their species, backed by the absolute knowledge that any threat to them would bring retaliation from the entire human race. This is why the Galactic Council accepted humanity so readily, Professor Zelkane said, understanding dawning in his voice. It wasn't generosity or progressive thinking. It was strategic necessity. Partly, Sarah agreed. But also because humans genuinely believe in the principles the Council represents. We just believe in them enough to fight for them. Most species seek peace through avoidance of conflict. Humans seek peace through strength and preparedness. She looked around the room one final time, meeting each student's gaze with calm confidence. I know this changes how you see me, how you see my species, but I hope it doesn't change how you interact with us. Humans are dangerous, yes, but we're dangerous to the things that threaten peace, knowledge, and cooperation. The class period was nearly over, but Professor Zelkane made no move to dismiss his students. The lesson they had just received went far beyond xenobiology and into the realm of galactic politics and interspecies relations. "Miss Chen," he said finally, "I believe you have provided us with insights that extend far beyond the scope of today's curriculum. Your demonstration has been quite illuminating." Sarah grinned then, and it was the expression of someone who had just completed a particularly challenging assignment. "Professor, you asked us to demonstrate our species' defensive mechanisms. I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that for humans, the best defense has always been overwhelming offense, backed by unbreakable loyalty to our pack." She stood and gathered her materials, the simple knife disappearing back into her kit bag with casual efficiency. "Class dismissed?" Professor Zelkane nodded slowly, still processing the implications of everything he had witnessed. As students began to file out of the classroom, their conversations were subdued but intense. The galaxy had just become a more complex place, and everyone present would need time to adjust their understanding of humanity's role within it. Sarah was the last to leave, pausing at the door to look back at her professor. "For what it's worth, Professor, humans really do want peace. We're just uniquely qualified to ensure that everyone else wants it too." As she disappeared into the corridor, Professor Zelkane found himself alone with the realization that the Galactic Academy of Sciences had just hosted a demonstration that would change interspecies relations for generations to come. The quiet human girl with the simple knife had just taught the galaxy what it truly meant to come from a death world. And in doing so, she had completed a lesson that none of them would ever forget. In the halls of the academy, word began to spread quickly through the gossip networks that connected all students. The story would grow in the telling, but the essential truth would remain unchanged. Humanity had revealed itself not as a species to be pitied for their harsh origins, but as natural guardians of the peace they claimed to cherish. And somewhere in the administrative offices of the Academy, new protocols were being quietly drafted for interaction with human students. Not restrictions, but acknowledgments of their unique capabilities and the responsibilities that came with them. The lesson was complete, but its implications would echo through the galaxy for years to come.